What's it all about? It's about the art of conversation, and so in many ways you've all already became part of the exhibit just by talking with each other, and it's all about people meeting people, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, we need that now more than ever.
Can we talk about the future of education?
The future of education is unfolding before our eyes. Nadine gave an example of how somebody can create their own education, and that I saw that happen literally over the last year, or maybe a year and a half with the pandemic. So, one of the things we had to do was to move online, and we've been trying to get the university, different parts of the university, we're trying to get the main part of the university to agree to let us do more of this, because that's one way to achieve the mission of the university, is to reach more people, and you can do that online. You can reduce the cost significantly. People don't have to come from wherever they are and spend money to do that, environmental footprint as well. But the university was of the view that something that's worked for 800 years doesn't need to be changed. And that's the usual argument not to innovate in a place like Cambridge. But with the pandemic and with lockdown, it happened overnight. They had to do it. And so we've done that. And now we realize that we're competing against a whole lot of other players, which have nothing to do traditionally with universities. There are startups from around the world, from South Africa or India, who are recognizing that there are people who want to study at different parts of their lives. They don't just want to come between 18 and 25. They don't want to have a degree. They don't have to take 3 years to get the degree and spend a lot of money to do it. It may take a week for them to learn something that they really want to learn. And that's all possible now. So the future of education is here. It's happening now.
Aristotle said, "Give me the child of 7 and I'll give you the man." And I'm a teacher by profession, and I always thought that point about how you intervene early and well in a child's life is absolutely critical. And it was one of the reasons I joined the Labour Party as well, because of the real focus on education and those early years. And this is before school as well as in school. And when I spent 7 years as Minister for Education before I took on Environment and Sustainability in Wales, and I introduced a foundation phase from 3 to 7, interesting enough, that included outdoor learning. So which has been very good at the moment in the context of COVID. Outdoor classrooms are required in Wales; they're compulsory. But what we did was play-based learning, and we've had 3 reviews that have tested, because now those students that I piloted when I was Education Minister have now been through. There are 6 cohorts have been through. As a result of which, next year in Wales, the whole education system shifts to that, and it's got education for sustainable development and global citizenship at its heart, and outdoor learning at its heart. So I think that actually, in terms of that, what we learn from other countries is absolutely critical in terms of education systems. And it was what New Zealand did with early years, it was what Finland did in the context of education that attracted me, rather than the Korean model. And Korea's always done very well, and I was working in Vietnam with the Minister for Education who'd introduced the very, very successful outcomes for Korea. And he said that if he had his time again, he'd go back and look at it again, because the Korean students spent a number of years best in the world in PISA at the age of 15. By 24, they had the biggest drop in understanding of any nation. So that there was this huge gap, but actually the Finnish children carried on with the curiosity for learning. So I think it's how, it's not just what, because education systems take at least 15 years to turn around, because in terms of compulsory systems. So it's how and what skills we need, and I don't think we're there yet in terms of the skills we need to manage the world we are going to live in and have started to live in now. And education systems need to address that better, and we all need to learn.
Yeah, it's also what for.
Yeah.
And as you say, Jane, we're going to be living in a much more complicated world with more people in it trying to do more things and having to manage all that. And there's earlier question came up about the purpose of education somehow being too connected to somehow making your economy work. Well, frankly, making this economy work better is kind of an open question. And we've lost sight of what the word means. Educate, to draw forth from people their potential, to provide people with the potential to manage the world. And we're still somewhat stuck in the 21st century where we somehow think this is through people's ability to know facts rather than to be able to manage and understand and evaluate those facts. And I think we've got to think much more about what education is for, particularly as we go on living in a world in which there are people very, very consciously trying to create confusion about what's a fact and what's not a fact. And in order to use that for political purposes. So we need people able to trust their own judgment about what's a fact and not be vulnerable and exposed to the sort of QAnon and all that kind of very manipulative and very nasty, politically nasty efforts to confuse people into obedience.
Which I think is why it's really important to open up, I'm going to flip the script a little bit, by opening up the education system and make it more appealing to people between the ages of 35 to 65 actually, especially among the more diverse communities as well, who didn't have an option to have an education. And I think if we could do that, we would see a huge sea of change.
As a woman working in a predominantly male-dominated environment, how have you dealt with the issue of patriarchy over the years?
Let me slightly flip the script back, right? One of the things I realise as I get older is that young people don't have a monopoly on being angry and wanting to change the world, because the longer I live in a patriarchy, the angrier I get about it. And in fact, in the last year, in fact, in the last 24 hours, if we needed evidence, we've had a pandemic which anybody who has looked at the inequality of power could have told you would have ended up disproportionately impacting on women in terms of the economic and social impact of it. And yet, look, it did. Anybody could have told you that if you have a government that doesn't have any women in it, in significant positions, they're going to make shit decisions. Oh yes, look, that's what happened. And then in the United States today, we have a situation where proof that when you have a right-wing male judicial system in the Supreme Court, and you have right-wing politics which fails to see that women should control their own bodies, you remove women's rights to abortion, which is what's happened in Texas, and it's a major change in the sort of legal system. So that's me being angry. What's the solution? I suppose for me, and then we come, I think, as we were before, I think there are sort of individual things that we need to do. So personally now, what I try to do is to, through my involvement in the Labour Party and through other areas, is actually to strengthen the ability of individual women to be able to make their voices heard, to identify these issues, but also to continue to work to try and change, for me, political parties and governments, so that actually we put women in places where they can make a difference and identify those issues earlier and begin to actually change the patriarchal structures and power that has led to those problems. But I think that just identifies that we've got a hell of a long way still to go.
Yeah, it's really, the last part of what you said is really important, that women become more visible. And I think that's one of the hardest things that I'm coming up against when I speak to people who I coach and mentor, that they just don't want to be seen. But I think there is so many educated women and young women that really have an amazing voice and have these amazing minds. And I think there has to be a way for us to keep encouraging and keep championing those women to come forward.
Make your question pop. I hope it's not corny.